Hello, my friends. Recent developments on the Ukrainian battlefield and in the diplomatic arena underscore a widening gap between reality on the ground and the narratives being pushed by Kiev, Washington, and the broader collective West. What we are witnessing is not the emergence of a credible peace process, but a complex piece of political theater designed to manage defeat, deflect responsibility, and preserve Western credibility in the face of strategic failure. The military situation, facts on the ground, Trump rhetoric. On the military front, Russian forces continue to consolidate gains at a pace that has surprised even seasoned observers. Ukrainian mapping channels themselves now acknowledge that the area of Guliapol is under full or near full Russian control. This development occurred faster than anticipated, and it is reasonable to expect that the Russian Ministry of Defense will formally confirm the capture and stabilization of the area in the near future. This was not a question of if, but when, and the timeline has accelerated. In Kupiansk, competing narratives once again illustrate the informational schizophrenia of the conflict. The Russian Ministry of Defense has issued a clear statement asserting that Kupiansk is under Russian control, with Russian units conducting clearing operations against remaining Ukrainian formations, sheltering in buildings and basements. Ukrainian commanders, predictably, deny this and claim the opposite. But this pattern is familiar. Ukrainian statements are aspirational, Russian statements are operational. History has shown which side's claims tend to align with eventual outcomes. Meanwhile, Russia has carried out another large-scale missile and drone strike targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, including facilities in Kyiv and Odessa. Reports indicate the use of hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles, resulting in blackouts and further degradation of Ukraine's already fragile power grid. This is not indiscriminate violence. It is methodical strategic pressure designed to erode Ukraine's capacity to sustain prolonged conflict. Russia's ability to execute such strikes repeatedly demonstrates that Western claims of depleted Russian stockpiles were fantasy from the start, diplomacy as performance art. While Russia advances militarily, Washington and Kyiv are busy staging a diplomatic spectacle. The United States continues to posture as a neutral mediator, a claim that collapses under even casual scrutiny. The Trump administration now presents itself as the broker of a grand peace, with President Trump publicly chasing what he frames as his 9th successful conflict resolution. Volodymyr Zelensky is traveling to Florida to meet Trump, where the latest incarnation of Kiev's ever-mutating peace proposals will be unveiled. We have progressed from a 28-point plan to several interim versions, and now to a so-called 20-point peace plan that Western media breathlessly describes as historic and final. In reality, it is neither. The supposed Ukrainian concessions amount to cosmetic gestures. Talk of a free economic zone or demilitarized area in Donbass, territory that is already under Russian law and control, part of the Russian Federation. This is not compromise. It is an attempt to rebrand defeat as diplomacy. Zelensky also insists on discussing territory and security guarantees directly with Trump, excluding Russia from the initial conversation. This alone reveals the absurdity of the process. Two parties cannot negotiate the outcome of a war while excluding the side that is winning it. Security guarantees and the risk of escalation. One of the central issues under discussion is the demand for Article 5-like security guarantees. Reports suggest the United States is considering a 15-year commitment of this nature. Zelensky, however, wants more. Such guarantees would effectively obligate the United States to go to war with Russia on Ukraine's behalf. This raises an obvious question that Washington seems eager to avoid. Do the American people understand what is being proposed in their name? Equally revealing is the discussion surrounding the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Zelensky's proposal involves joint U.S.-Ukrainian control of a facility that has been under Russian control since late 2022, with Russia graciously allowed to receive electricity from it. This proposal borders on the surreal. It ignores military reality, legal reality, and political reality. It is less a negotiating position than a public relations exercise. Money, as always, looms large. Reparations, frozen Russian assets, and Western investment in Ukraine remain key talking points. These discussions rest on the assumption that Russia will accept responsibility for a war it is winning and pay for the reconstruction of a state that has functioned primarily as a Western proxy. This assumption is detached from reality, ceasefires, referendums, and illusions of leverage. Zelensky is also pushing for a 60 to 90-day ceasefire followed by a referendum. According to his vision, Ukrainians would vote on the final peace plan, but the framing reveals the deception at the heart of the proposal. The vote would effectively ask Ukrainians whether they approve Russia's capitulation. In truth, it would be Russia asked to capitulate, surrender territory, accept NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine, and relinquish strategic assets. There is no plausible scenario in which Moscow accepts this. Russia, for its part, continues to signal openness to negotiations with the United States, while making clear that Europe is not a serious interlocutor. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has stated bluntly that European governments are primarily interested in sabotaging any progress. At the same time, he noted that diplomatic contacts with Washington have intensified and that Russia and the United States are closer to a solution than at any point since the conflict escalated. Ryabkov pointed to December 25 as a significant milestone, though he declined to elaborate. This has fueled speculation that serious discussions are taking place behind closed doors, discussions that bear little resemblance to the theatrical 20-point plan being marketed to the public. Territorial reality and the Anchorage framework. Russian media reports add further context. According to Kommersant, President Vladimir Putin told business leaders that while Russia insists on full control of Donbass, limited territorial adjustments are not categorically excluded. This aligns with what has been described as the Anchorage framework, a continuation and expansion of the Istanbul talks, combined with proposals floated in mid-2024. Under this framework, Donbass is unequivocally Russian. Zaporizhzhia and Kherson are recognized as part of the Russian Federation, with the possibility of a temporary freeze along the current contact line while broader political processes unfold in Ukraine, including elections and demilitarization. This, by all indications, represents Russia's major concession, not surrender, but patience. Strategic signaling beyond Ukraine. Beyond Ukraine, Russia continues to reinforce its strategic deterrence. Reports citing satellite imagery suggest preparations to deploy hypersonic missile systems in Belarus. This development, while framed as alarming by Western media, should surprise no one. Minsk has been discussing such deployments for over a year. The message is clear. Any attempt by NATO to escalate or widen the conflict will be met with overwhelming force. Belarusian officials have openly warned that Eastern Europe is rearming and preparing for confrontation. Russia's response is not escalation for its own sake, but deterrence grounded in credible capability. A world of selective sovereignty. Elsewhere, the recognition of Somaliland by Israel exposes the West's selective approach to sovereignty and international law. Predictably, the African Union, Saudi Arabia, and numerous regional actors have rejected the move as a violation of Somalia's territorial integrity. The precedent is clear. Self-determination is endorsed only when it aligns with Western or allied interests. China, meanwhile, has responded decisively to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan by sanctioning American defense firms and executives. These sanctions threaten supply chains, rare earth access, and industrial capacity, areas where China holds decisive leverage. This is not symbolic retaliation. It is economic warfare, and it will have real consequences for the U.S. Military-industrial complex, the pattern beneath the noise, from Ukraine to Taiwan, from Africa to Eastern Europe, a consistent pattern emerges. The United States and its allies speak the language of peace while practicing the mechanics of escalation. They invoke international law selectively, negotiate without acknowledging reality, and mistake media narratives for leverage. Russia, by contrast, operates from a position grounded in military control, strategic patience, and clear red lines. It keeps channels open, but it does not confuse dialogue with capitulation. The coming days will be filled with headlines, statements, and social media theatrics. But beneath the noise, the fundamentals remain unchanged. Russia is winning the war. Ukraine is losing it. And no amount of diplomatic stagecraft can reverse that fact. History will not judge this conflict by the number of peace plans proposed, but by who understood reality and who refused to see it. The war in Ukraine is approaching its end not because of any elegantly numbered peace plan, nor because of a carefully staged meeting in Mar-a-Lago, Geneva, or any other symbolic venue. It is moving toward its conclusion for a far simpler and far more unforgiving reason. Strategic reality has decisively defeated political illusion. Russia does not need to sign on to Western-authored talking points to validate what has already been established through military control, constitutional law, and irreversible facts on the ground. Moscow does not require a referendum organized in Kiev to legitimize territory it already governs, nor does it need Washington's approval to understand its own strategic position. Power, once demonstrated and sustained, speaks for itself. What we are witnessing today, the constant recycling of peace proposals, the choreographed diplomacy, the theatrical optimism of Western leaders, is not a genuine search for resolution. It is an effort to manage defeat rather than prevent it. The objective is no longer victory, but narrative containment, shifting blame, distributing responsibility, and constructing a future explanation for why hundreds of billions of dollars and countless political promises failed to produce the intended outcome. Ukraine, in this process, has ceased to function as an autonomous strategic actor. It has become a bargaining instrument simultaneously reassured with imaginary security guarantees and pressured to perform symbolic concessions in the name of peace. Yet the truth remains unavoidable. Ukraine no longer determines the terms of this war's ending. That authority now rests with those who control territory, logistics, escalation, dominance, and time itself. Europe fares no better. European capitals continue to speak the language of values, unity, and collective security while quietly confronting an uncomfortable reality. They lack the military capacity, industrial depth, political cohesion, and social tolerance for a prolonged confrontation with Russia. Their role has been reduced to sustaining the appearance of relevance while hoping for a diplomatic miracle that absolves them of responsibility. Russia, by contrast, is behaving like a power that understands history, understands its adversaries, and most importantly, understands that time is working in its favor. Moscow does not need urgency. It does not need public validation. It does not need to sell peace. It needs only to hold its strategic line, that security is non-negotiable, constitutionally integrated territory is not subject to bargaining, and NATO's failure in Ukraine cannot be cosmetically repackaged as a diplomatic success. The most telling aspect of Russia's position is not what it says, but what it no longer needs to say. Its leverage is now expressed through action rather than rhetoric, through military posture rather than press conferences. From Ukraine to Belarus and across the broader European security architecture, the message is unmistakable. The era of unilateral Western dictate has reached its limit. History rarely concludes with cinematic finales. More often, it ends with exhaustion, denial, and reluctant acceptance that foundational assumptions were wrong. The Ukraine conflict will be no exception. It will not conclude with a triumphant signature ceremony, but with the bitter acknowledgement that Russia has redefined the security boundaries of Europe and the West could not stop it. When the slogans fade, when the peace plans are archived alongside other failed doctrines, what will remain is a simple, uncomfortable truth. Russia did not prevail merely by force. It prevailed because it understood reality while its opponents attempted to escape it. That is the enduring lesson of this war. Recent developments on the southern front of the Ukraine conflict underscore a recurring pattern that Western analysts continue to underestimate. Russian operational tempo, intelligence exploitation, and the structural weakness of Ukrainian command and control under sustained pressure. Multiple mapping sources now converge on the conclusion that the settlement of Hulipol has effectively fallen under Russian control. While exact percentages vary depending on the map set, use Suryak, AMK, Deep State, ISW, the overlap is striking. Approximately 90% of the settlement, including its central sectors, is now controlled by Russian forces. Geolocation footage confirms this assessment, showing Ukrainian flags removed and Russian unit flags raised near the town center. More significant than the territorial shift itself is what accompanied it: the capture of a Ukrainian command post. Video footage released by Russian forces shows computers, radios, printers, hard drives, notebooks, tablets, and personal mobile phones left behind intact. This was not a scorched earth withdrawal. This was a command collapse under pressure. The implications are severe. Even if no single piece of intelligence proves decisive, everything connected to that command node must now be treated as compromised. Communications platforms widely used by Ukrainian units, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Discord, often contain not only tactical coordination, but personal data, movement histories, call signs, frequency references, and informal operational habits. A single unlocked phone can unravel weeks of operational security. In professional military environments, standard operating procedures exist precisely to prevent this. Radios are zeroed, encryption is wiped, hardware is physically destroyed if necessary. That these steps were not taken suggests either insufficient time, panic, or failure of higher command to authorize withdrawal. Ukrainian sources themselves acknowledge this. Officers report that permission to evacuate the battalion command post was not granted in time. As a result, the headquarters fell intact into Russian hands. This had cascading effects. Units lost contact with command. The 106th Battalion retreated prematurely, exposing the flank of the 102nd. Russian forces exploited the gap from both the west, near Mariupol, and from the northeast of Huliaipol. Reports indicate prisoners were taken, though confirmation remains pending. From an intelligence perspective, this is not a minor incident. Even if files were deleted, data recovery is often possible. Radios that are electronically zeroed can still reveal patterns. Paper notebooks often contain radio logs, coordinates, or shorthand references meaningful to trained analysts. The worst-case scenario is not that Russia learns everything, but that Ukraine must now assume everything connected to that node is compromised. That means rekeying encryption, changing frequencies, restructuring command nets, and rebuilding trust across units already under stress. I have personally witnessed far smaller incidents trigger massive security overhauls. In one case, a radio misplaced for less than a minute, never accessed, never exploited, forced a complete reset of encrypted communications across multiple platforms. What happened in Huliaipol is orders of magnitude more serious. This episode also illustrates something broader. The Southern Front is moving faster than Ukrainian command structures can adapt. In slower sectors, equipment is withdrawn methodically. Here, it was overrun. Southern operational momentum. Beyond Huliaipol, Russian advances continue across the southern axis. Movement has been recorded near Novopavlivka, Malotokmachka, and westward toward Neharka. While individual map sources differ on the precise contours of the gray zone, the trend is unmistakable. Incremental Russian gains across a widening front. Comparative map analysis highlights another issue often ignored in public discourse: the uncertainty itself. Depending on the source, discrepancies of 700, 800 square kilometers exist across the entire front. This is not propaganda. It is the reality of a fluid battlefield. Only after the war ends will we know which mapping methodology most closely matched reality. Further east, Russian forces continue grinding advances from Seversk into Kramatorsk-Sloviansk depth. Seversk, held by Ukraine for nearly 4 years, collapsed within days once Russian pressure intensified. Exploitation followed rapidly. This is not a collapse of morale alone. It reflects attritional superiority and logistical depth. In the north, contested areas around Kupiansk, Borivka, and Vovchansk remain volatile. Ukrainian counterattacks have occurred, but Russian use of MLRS and sustained artillery indicates continued pressure Claims that certain settlements remain firmly under Ukrainian control are often contradicted by the very maps used to assert them. Near Pokrovsk and the so-called Pokrovsk North sector, Ukrainian forces have conducted limited counterpushes to stabilize road access. These are tactical maneuvers, not strategic reversals. The broader situation remains a gray zone, reflecting exhaustion on one side and methodical pressure on the other. Politics, the mirage of a 90% peace plan, against this military backdrop. Political maneuvering intensifies. Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to Florida to discuss a supposed 20-point peace plan with Donald Trump has been widely framed as 90% complete. This framing is misleading. Yes, perhaps 18 of the 20 points are loosely agreed upon, but the remaining 10% contains the only points that matter: territory, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and security guarantees. There is no consensus, not between Russia and Ukraine, not even between Ukraine and the United States. Zaporizhzhia is fully occupied by Russian forces. Ukraine wants it returned under Western guarantees. Russia sees no incentive to relinquish a strategic asset without fundamental concessions. On territory more broadly, positions remain irreconcilable. Security guarantees are the most contentious issue of all. The credibility trap of Article 5 style guarantees, as Jennifer Kavanagh and others have argued persuasively, extending NATO-like security guarantees to Ukraine risks destroying the credibility of Western deterrence rather than strengthening it. If the United States truly believed Ukraine was vital enough to risk war with Russia, American troops would already be there. 3 presidents, Obama, Trump, Biden, have all refused to deploy them. This reveals the real assessment of U.S. interests. Supporters of guarantees argue that a treaty would change behavior. History suggests otherwise. The United States has intervened militarily without treaties when it deemed its interests threatened Kuwait, Korea. Conversely, it has avoided war when costs outweighed perceived benefits. A signature on paper does not override strategic calculation. If Washington extends a guarantee it is unwilling to honor, and Russia tests it, the result is catastrophic not only for Ukraine, but for NATO itself. Failure to respond would shatter confidence in all U.S. guarantees from the Baltics to the Pacific. Even absent a direct Russian challenge, the mere existence of an unfulfilled commitment would corrode credibility. Allies would doubt Washington's resolve, adversaries would probe it. Most dangerously, an Article 5 style commitment implies readiness for war with Russia, including the risk of nuclear escalation. This is not theoretical. Moscow, Washington, Beijing, Paris, and London all factor nuclear risk into their calculations. Russia has already demonstrated a willingness to absorb costs far beyond what the United States has accepted in Ukraine. That asymmetry gives Moscow leverage in any confrontation. The conclusion is unavoidable. Broad, dramatic security guarantees are more dangerous than narrow, credible ones. Real deterrence lies in defensive capability, not performative treaties. Europe's strategic self-delusion, Europe's role complicates matters further. Publicly, European leaders speak of peace. Privately, many still hope for Russian collapse. This is poison pill diplomacy, appearing cooperative while delaying meaningful compromise. European elites have tied their political survival to victory, not settlement. They have poured money into Ukraine while withholding decisive systems, always betting on internal Russian failure rather than Ukrainian military triumph. Taurus missiles remain withheld. Critical capabilities arrive too late or not at all. At the same time, Europe flirts with destabilization strategies, Transnistria, Kaliningrad, informational warfare, hoping to stretch Russian resources. These are risky games that assume Russia will not respond asymmetrically. The growing divide between Washington and Brussels is real. If it continues, it will reshape transatlantic relations within a decade. Great powers go to extraordinary lengths to secure what they define as core interests. History offers no shortage of examples. Conclusion. The battlefield realities in southern Ukraine, the intelligence windfall from captured command infrastructure, and the structural weaknesses of Ukrainian command all point in one direction. Russia retains escalation, dominance, and strategic patience. Political theater cannot override military facts. Peace plans that ignore power realities are fantasies. Security guarantees that cannot be honored are worse than meaningless. They are destructive. The war will not end because of Western signatures. It will end when the balance of power makes further fighting irrational. At present, that balance still favors Russia.